to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm Dr. Greer and the founder of the Disclosure Project and also CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and also we're working on this film Sirius, which you can find out more about at sirius.neverendinglight.com. And I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for giving us this time every 2 weeks to bring you up to date with the projects that we're working on and to share our information about contact with advanced extraterrestrial civilizations and the science of consciousness and new energy systems that we're working to bring out to replace the fossil fuel power grid system that, as all of you know, has just pretty much been wiped out in the northeastern United States. So today we're going to talk about a whole lot of issues around how to make contact with intelligent life forms from other star systems who get here through other dimensions and what that means in terms of the Vedic understanding of consciousness. And we're also going to talk about some of these new energy challenges that we're facing and how we can create a world that's more stable and sustainable than we have today with the kind of sciences that we've discovered. So I'd like to thank the World Puja Network because they've been so great at supporting our effort and giving us this opportunity to bring everyone up to date every couple of weeks. And today we have Marilyn and Diane with us, who will be talking about the experiences they've had with their contact group for CSETI that's in the upstate New York area outside of Albany. And just by introduction, I met these two fine people about 3 years ago, 3.5 maybe, at the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and they have just become incredibly organized, powerful, conscious members of the CSETI network worldwide, and have been hosting contact events at their country place out in they have some land up in New York, and have had amazing experiences. And they're going to share with everyone the kinds of experiences they've had both with the group process and forming the group and the kinds of contact experiences they've had and their perspective on doing this as a group together. So I'm really honored to have both of them with us today. Thank you guys for joining us.
Oh, it's wonderfully great to be here.
Yeah, well, why don't you share with people a little bit about kind of what's been going on up there at your site in New York?
Well, we have about 30 to 40 people as members to our group. It's quite an eclectic group. There we range from therapists to attorneys to doctors to teachers, ministers, policewomen, firemen, retirees, students. So it's a wide range of people and ages from 21 to 80. So we have quite an extraordinary group in that sense. And also, what's amazing, Stephen, is they come from quite long distances away. They come from down in New York City and Long Island, from eastern Massachusetts, from western New York. And it's extraordinary that they will drive 3 hours to come and have a whole evening experience and sometimes drive all the way home afterwards. So it's turned out to be just an incredibly dedicated group, which always impresses me. And as a result, the kind of cohesive consciousness that has developed is extraordinary, and I think that's why we're having the kind of experiences we're having. Last September, we had a group, and we had been seeing, I think I've mentioned on the show before, a golden craft that has come on our property or above us maybe 5 or 6 times.
Right.
It's very distinct, and it's the same every time in terms of what it looks like. And on this, it had not come to our group. And on this night, we gathered, and I'll just say for a moment how we kind of structure the group, which is from your protocol and from Diane and I going to several of your expeditions. But because our group has become so cohesive, we start the night kind of sharing what's happened since the last group, and everybody shares any experiences they've been having. Well, in September, before we even got to the meditation and we have this wonderful, by the way, speaker system outdoors, Stephen, where we're able to play your CD meditations. And so we hear your voice kind of rebounding off the trees. It's quite wonderful. And do your meditation. But before we ever got to that in the September meeting, we started seeing several craft high up, and they were responding to our lasers, and they were several flash bulbs and several crafts that moved across the sky, and as we shined our lasers up, they responded with powering up. And then from the northeast, we began to see this incredible light emerge over the trees, and sure enough, it was the golden craft once again. And on this night, there was probably about 28 to 30 people, and so everybody, and it moved so slowly, and it sort of just glided over us, and it was probably only 1,000 feet up, which is very close.
Right, yes.
And it was so bright, the light, but it was so close this time that we could see that it was triangular shaped. We could see the craft itself above the light, and through binoculars, several people saw it very distinctly, and it moved, gosh, I bet it was up in the sky for over a minute, which is quite amazing. And it moved from the northeast to the southwest, and everybody was so affected this night by this golden craft. It just felt like afterwards everybody's hearts, and some people were crying, people's hearts felt so open and so filled with love. And of course, about 5 minutes later, we had 2 military helicopters moving over our house, and we are out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's no bases near us.
Right.
And 2 helicopters came zooming right in, and we'd had so much activity so quickly. And of course, after they came in over our house, after that we had very little craft up, at least in the sky, but had a lot of activity more down close to us.
Wow.
So that
was there any sound coming from this triangular?
No sound whatsoever.
Right.
And it was only 1,000 feet up. It was gliding, it almost just like dancing across the floor. It was just, oh my gosh, it was silent.
And how did it disappear?
Nothing.
Did it just vanish, or did it move?
Yeah, pretty much. It vanished behind some trees, like in the south, it seemed. It headed out to the southwest, and the way that it came in, I was sitting there, and I must have felt it behind me and one of the other group members, and I just turned my head, and I started to see this huge glow, and the whole experience began, and then it faded out over the horizon in the same way.
Excellent.
Yeah, and people who had never seen, I think for some people it was their first experience ever seeing any craft, and it was really life-changing. I mean, it was life-changing for all of us, but I was so happy that people who had never seen anything got to just experience this slow motion glide. It was, it was so designed for our group because there's a lot of trees here, and it just came directly over the center of our group, and it was magnificent. It really was.
And Stephen, what was so incredible about it wasn't just the light that was truly not. I mean, you can begin to feel what lights that humans make on aircraft look like.
Right.
This was so celestial in its feel and appearance, and then you could see the craft, and it was triangle.
And that's what we have always noted, is that the color and it isn't just light; it's actually conscious light, and that it's a transdimensional level where you have a celestial component to this light, even though it's a spacecraft, because their technologies are so advanced that the craft itself is conscious. And this level of artificial intelligence is something most people have never even entertained as possible. But if people can visualize the interstellar civilizations, their spacecraft are not just like driving around in a Ford or something. They're actually materialized out of the matrix of energy of the zero-point energy field, and where space and time and matter all come together. But as they manifest their spacecraft, which are seamless, they have such pure elements in them, that the light emanating is at a level of purity and color and energy unlike anything that can be man-made, but also the entire spacecraft is imbued with the consciousness of those who are in it because they are wired bioelectromagnetically and in consciousness into the craft, and that is actually the central navigating system. It's the consciousness interface with the technology, which back in 1991 I coined the term consciousness-assisted technology, or CAT. And of course, they also have technology-assisted consciousness, which means that their own consciousness can be projected, amplified, and enabled to affect things in linear space-time through technology. So it goes both ways, both technology-assisted consciousness and consciousness-assisted technology. And, this is, of course, everyone on the World Fusion Network gets a sense of this if they understand the Vedas and how the central operating system, as it were, of the whole cosmos is unbounded pure consciousness. But all these interstellar civilizations understand this at the level of scientific reproducibility and manifestation. And, I tell people that, we're just 100 years or so into anything resembling a scientific developed civilization, and we're dealing with civilizations that are in the hundreds of thousands to millions of years more developed than we are. And so yet the color, the light, the energy, and this is why people are affected in their heart chakra and their crown chakra and consciousness so heavily when they have an encounter like this. Also, I believe it's because the light and the energy that's connecting from the ship to the people is actually an extension of these very highly enlightened interstellar civilizations that are moving and operating out of God consciousness and higher states of cosmic consciousness.
That's exactly what everybody in the group felt. They felt literally touched in their consciousness by these beings.
Well, this is what's really exciting to me, of course, having, started this project about 22 years ago, is that there are now so many, dozens of groups all over the world, hundreds, thousands of people now doing this, and people are having these sort of experiences from South Africa to Japan to Russia to wherever, and this proves the fact that, I've always said from the very beginning, I am not important in this at all. It's the fact that there's a universal level of understanding of consciousness that once you apply it to sort of the post-space age of, not the Earth space age, but the true transdimensional space age we're entering into, where we begin to realize the entire cosmos is, in fact, pure consciousness manifesting as galaxies and stars and planets and civilizations and dolphins and people. And that all of this really is that, and that through the understanding of consciousness and the development of higher states of consciousness and the application of that into the various cities, S-I-D-D-H-I-S, the various Vedic powers and abilities that naturally develop with the development of consciousness, you begin to realize that when we're talking about, not the nonsense that Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, my uncle's old company, and other outfits are doing that people often see and confuse with ET crap, but the real ET vehicles are just amazing. And what you're describing is so similar to what happened last year at Mount Shasta and at several other trainings recently where we've had this sort of chevron or triangular-shaped object that is pure. It's like liquid gold. The light is so gold.
Yeah.
And we've had this contact with this craft, and Emery and Emery is a senior member of our team who comes to almost all of these expeditions, had developed this relationship with these very tall beings from the Arcturan star system, and they are very involved, highly conscious, and very strong in terms of protecting us and what we're doing. And we've had very direct experiences where we've actually been able to photograph these beings who are anywhere from 12, 15 feet tall, and also are on board these craft that have the same exactly what you're describing, this sort of pure gold light and energy, a very high consciousness in that shape, either triangular or chevron, spear shaped, like the tip of an arrowhead, sort of an arrowhead shape.
Yes.
Yep, that's exactly what we've seen over and over again.
Yeah, even one of our members, I think it was like a week later, and she was on her way out here, and she looked up in the sky, and she saw the golden craft and she took a picture of it, and she just saw it herself. This was, I believe, a week or so after we had that contact.
Wow.
That was amazing, because she got here and she said, oh, my God, I saw the golden craft. And it was only a couple miles from here where she saw it. Well, what was so extraordinary about that is we realized right at the same time that she saw the craft and got a picture, and it's great because it shows it through her car window so you can see how low it was. And then right at the same time we saw a big white orb come into the living room, and when she got it, by the time she was out here, Stephen, sure enough, a big military jet again went like so low the treetops moved right over our house. And so it's like, boy, they know when these craft pop into the flux field, they know when they come, but which is just evidence for us that sure enough this is an incredible craft that comes in.
Well, and this has happened all over the world. You know, people often have come to, I know the filmmaker, Arm Kalika, who's working on the film Sirius with us, and a few months ago in June he was with us in Colorado, and we had this craft that flew in out of the northwest that was fully materialized, brilliant, came right over, and these jets that had been in a holding pattern up near Colorado Springs where NORAD is, the North American Air Defense Command, put on their afterburners and came roaring in and arced right towards it. We actually have home video and photographs of this craft just dematerializing, or sort of making a circle, going in a circle and then vanishing in thin air as this jet approached. And you know, he couldn't believe. I said, "Oh yeah, well this has happened several thousand times over the last number of years." And I said, "You have to understand that military programs that track deep space and also the airspace, not just over the United States but anywhere in the world, when these objects appear, frequently will send in helicopters or jets to try to suppress them fully materializing and making too far of a degree of contact that could blow the lid off the secrecy." And it's sort of a cat and mouse game, cosmic cat and mouse game we catch ourselves in the middle of. But what I always tell people to do when these military assets, whether it's a jet or an aircraft, or even when we've been out in the national forest and we've had kind of like Humvee-type vehicles roll in with their lights off with armed people in them and looking at us with night scopes, and this has happened a number of times, which is why now we do everything on private land instead of in national forest. One reason, and is that, you know, to always connect not with anger but to this heart place of cosmic consciousness, blessing, and forgiveness, and send that from whoever has been sent out to do that up through the chain of command of this so-called Majestic 12 or this covert group that's been keeping all this stuff secret, and to transform that energy. And it's actually a very powerful city to do that. And I always remember that, you know, the story of when Mahatma Gandhi was shot, how the last thing he did, he turned to the person who shot him and blessed him, put his hands together in the blessing, and blessed the person who killed him as he literally fell and was dead, you know, just right at the feet of this person. And that, not that that's going to happen to us, I'm just saying the energy of forgiveness and the energy of enlightenment and a blessing, rather than getting into the whole fear and anger part of it, is very liberating and very powerful. So I tell people who are doing this is to practice that when these military and other aircraft come over. Although sometimes you do get irritated. I've been tempted to moon them or something, or you know, I haven't yet. But the other thing.
But you know, but Stephen, I have to tell you what you're saying, because one of the most striking times with you on an expedition was in Mount Shasta, I believe in 2010, and we were up there, and there were all of the military with their Humvees, and we could hear their walkie-talkies, and
right.
People with night vision could see them, and people in the group were getting a little afraid, and you did this absolutely amazing meditation where you said the names of some of the people in the higher chain and asked all of us to send love and prayers of compassion to them. And it was one of the most moving nights I think I've had on one of those expeditions. And that had nothing to do with seeing craft per se. And that's what I think people need to understand about these expeditions, is it's not just about seeing extraterrestrial craft, it's also the state of consciousness that we as humans find ourselves in that creates the possibility and the potentiality for ET contact. But that night was such a heart-opening night, I think, for everybody in that group. And that was something you did and then we did as a group. And afterwards, everybody felt absolutely calm.
Right, exactly. And as it says in the Bhagavad Gita, little of this eliminates all fear, that if you can be in that state of pure consciousness and higher consciousness, you're not going to be afraid of anything. And that's actually the true fearless state. It's not a machismo, bravado, stupidity. It's a state of inner silence and strength that is born of this level of consciousness. And, this is why, back in the early 90s when I had everyone from the head of Army intelligence to some CIA and NSA people cajoling me, trying to bribe me, threatening me, blah, blah. It just didn't affect me at all because, once you understand what is really happening at this time in history and the power that exists within not your ego so much as the fact that your individuality can connect to this larger cosmic being that is always within us, that in that state you're not going to be intimidated or induced or put off the path by these sort of influences. And I always have referred to this as the Shambhala warrior state, the spirit warrior. And then by warrior I don't mean violence, I mean this state of consciousness. And that's something that takes a great deal more inner strength than just picking up a club and hitting someone in the head or reacting in anger and revenge. But and ultimately this is the lesson that humanity is going to have to learn if we're going to go from where we are now into a state of world peace and, of course, universal peace. And one of the things I always point out to people, because so much of the UFO and even New Age community has this false belief of, well, we need to go out there and there are the good ETs and there are bad ETs, and the bad ETs we need to fight and, have this existential struggle with, sort of like some of the crazy teachings that you can find in various places. And I'm going, okay, let's think about this for a moment. In the Cold War, we had a few thousand thermonuclear weapons aimed at each other between the Soviet Union and the United States, and any deployment of that system would have resulted in the extinction of all life on Earth in a nuclear winter and a Holocaust like we've never seen. So if you're dealing with interstellar technologies that are much more advanced than hydrogen bombs and atomic bombs, you really think we're going to go from where we are now into interplanetary conflict, which is what Douglas MacArthur called for in the Congress in the mid-50s in his last speech to Congress, when he said World War III will be interplanetary, because you have people who have this sort of very atavistic and tribal mindset that if they're out there and we can't control them, they're an enemy. And that's really how basic it is. I had a guy who was with Navy intelligence come up to me after a talk I gave some years ago, and he began to explain to me that they had developed electromagnetic weapon systems that not only track these objects, which is how the military craft show up so quickly after a sighting like you had, but also have electromagnetic weapons that target and attempt to hit and destroy these extraterrestrial vehicles, and that they have done so on a number of occasions, unfortunately successfully. Not a very high success rate, but enough that it's been terrible when it has happened. And I asked him, I said, why would we do something so stupid? He says, because they can. He says it's basically like dogs peeing on their property, marking their property, that these guys view this as our planet, and these are intruders, and therefore if they're in our atmosphere and airspace, we're going to shoot them down. I mean, it's just that simplistic. So, now there's another agenda, and that's the agenda of trying to eventually roll out another sort of decoy. And most wars of the last century have been stagecrafted and organized by the gangbangsters and warmongers and war profiteers, and certainly the Iraq War was. And you look at if you really are trying to build your war capability and your budget for corporate military spending and grow it past $1 trillion to $2 or $3 trillion and $4 trillion, you've got to have a sizable enemy. And this is why there's so much false information about this alleged alien threat that's out there. And our experience, having gone around the world for 22 years, is that the only time we've been threatened is when humans have threatened us, or police in Mexico have tried to rob us and take our passports and cash or whatever. But we've never had anything but the most beautiful experiences with the actual ETs. And I tell people that is a body of evidence and experience that I'll hold it to any of the myths that are out there. And yet, most people are very confused on this central issue because they hear about all the horrible things that allegedly the ETs are doing, and they don't realize that military special forces have developed anti-gravity vehicles. They have these little creatures called programmed life forms that look like aliens, and I call them aliens because I call the real ETs, and that have been engaged in mutilations and abductions and all kinds of frightening scenarios. And I have a document from the Strategic Studies Institute that talks about the use of abductions and advanced aircraft like this and robotic life forms to stagecraft a scenario where the public would be afraid of aliens so that the world could be united around a common alien threat. And interestingly, this is quite separate from what Wernher von Braun, the guy who invented the rocket for Hitler, said on his deathbed to Carol Rosin when he said, this has been an agenda operating for some time, that they would try to hoax a threat from outer space. And so what I tell people is that it's a little bit like the old wizard in The Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, pulling all these levers and scaring the bejeebies out of everyone. And it's just stagecraft. And that is the word that's used in this document, is stagecraft. And they're very good at it. And 99.99% of people who study the UFO subject are taken in by that paradigm of fear and alien invasion, so much so that it's almost all that you see coming out of Hollywood and cable news channels. And if you go to a UFO conference, about 90% of the subject matter is on stuff that's stagecraft and hoaxed. So it becomes a very difficult thing. So, we're sort of a voice in the wilderness saying, yes, but wait a minute. Let's really take a look at this and look at it dispassionately, because, any civilization that could travel through other dimensions faster than the speed of light and get here would have absolutely no problem taking on this planet 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago or today. And that's not their agenda. They don't care to do that. The only thing they're really looking from us is peace and cooperation in space and the development of our state of consciousness and a spiritual social development, so we can join with these interplanetary civilizations. And that's the big challenge of facing the world today, actually.
Well, and Stephen, you know what? The real power, people talk about the alien invasion, but the real power that we have is that we as humans develop this expanded higher consciousness and understand that we hold it within ourselves. And what's so fantastic about these protocols is that we have to be, familiar with meditation and higher consciousness states, and in knowing what we're doing in those states, and that's one way we're vectoring in these ETs. But it's not just about the outside contact. To me, it's really about the inside contact we make with the truth about who we really are as spiritual high consciousness beings, and that's where we need to be headed, and that's what will be really the most powerful thing on Earth. People often say, well, if the ETs exist, why don't they come and save us? And it's like, because we have to save ourselves. Right. And the great thing about this protocol is to watch. When I watch this group we have here, learning that, understanding oneness through unity consciousness, and understanding that they come free of, their prejudices and free of their fears. And we use love as the guiding principle. And, we're willing to face the unknown as a warrior spirit, as you're talking about, with tremendous open-mindedness. And we understand the universal rights of all beings. When we come together with those principles, what happens among us, the night in October, and I just want to mention this, it was total cloud cover, Stephen. There was no way for us to do a lot of contact with crafts that might appear, although sometimes they have, even with clouds. But this was really thick cloud cover. We stayed outside. We went into we did your meditation outside. It was beautiful. And people went into this deep meditative state, and we joined our hearts, and we had such an uplifting experience together as a group in this cohesive consciousness state. And several people had beautiful visions. Some people had, for the first time, energetic seeing, where you're not seeing necessarily with your physical eyes, but your conscious eyes, your conscious heart, your feeling. And many people had similar experiences of seeing these tall, 12 to 15 feet extraterrestrial beings almost fully materialized all around the circle. And that's what our consciousness did. So, we may think this is about going out and making contact with extraterrestrials, but, when I sit and feel what happens in these groups, it's also about making contact with the enormity of our own expanded consciousness.
Yeah, when you do
and we
that,
support each other.
Yeah, and then when you do that, all these other things become very easy, because actually once you're in that state, not only can you remote view with your inner consciousness and see these ET beings that are around us in another dimension, just in the so-called astral area of energy, but you can begin to see more subtle energy, such as the electromagnetic fields. So you can have an energy field that will be the shape of a craft that will be literally sitting right outside the group or above the group. It won't be fully materialized, but you can actually see it with your physical eyes and feel it. And that perception, and of course in the Vedic traditions is called the development of celestial perception, that as you become more developed in centered consciousness, you're able to see not just only spirit beings and angelic beings or celestial or what have you, or devas or nature spirit beings, but you can also see extraterrestrial craft and beings when they are shifted beyond what I call the crossing point of light, the speed of light, which means that they're in the near astral being just one click beyond linear space-time, but they're emitting a sort of energy that you can sense with your body, you can feel with your heart, you can see with your inner sight, but even with your outer sight, you can begin to see them.
Yes.
They are all around you, and we've had this happen over and over again, and when people first have this happen, they go, oh my God, they're standing all around us, and they're actually seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
And multiple people see the same things in the same location. And it's an astonishing experience of the development of this perceptual ability. And what I point out to people is that there's nothing that requires ETs to be in a physical linear form, particularly when they're military aircraft chasing them around. They can shift into this other dimension, which is how they travel through interstellar space. Their whole vibration is rising to something way beyond the speed of light and matter, and then coming back into linear space and time when they can. But that means that they can easily be amongst you, and they're in that energy form. And then that's why we've had so many unusual things happen with our electronics, where we'll get these objects on camera as spheres of light. We'll get these electromagnetic tones that come through our magnetometer, a magnetic field meter, and our electronics. And we'll get all kinds of other phenomena, and we'll hear tones that will come around us emanating from these beings and from their craft, because they're in that tonality, like a mantra. And as everyone knows at the World Puja Network, the whole Vedic teaching of name and form, where the tonality of a thought, if it's done correctly in the Vedic tradition and from a certain level of consciousness, can manifest that object. This is why many of the enlightened masters will be able to manifest rings or materialize objects.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a siddhi, S-I-D-D-H-I, siddhi, a power, ability. But these ET civilizations have that done to a scientific certainty along with their consciousness, so they can be around us and begin to manifest light, manifest tones, may blip in and out of this dimension where they're fully materialized for a second, a nanosecond, or a minute or so, and then vanish, but they're still there. So even when they vanished out of the linear space-time, they're still there, and you can begin to develop your celestial perception where you can actually see them. And these sort of breakthroughs are the most exciting for me to see people go through as I go through these expeditions and train people in these various sciences of consciousness.
Yeah, and that's why a working group has been so important, because it feels like it is this support for your consciousness expansion. And so we gather, and we're all helping each other to keep seeing as we share our experiences and what we see. And even this night in October, time just elapsed to such a point. We were all so gone during that meditation. Some of us felt like we were in some kind of a craft, and we couldn't really explain it. And it was just really amazing to start to expand your consciousness together. And,
right.
You know, I've been a meditator for quite a while, but since being a part of these working groups, it's just like the group is so much greater than what one individual can experience. And that's been really profound for me, is to really connect together in this higher state of consciousness.
Yeah, there's
and
wonderful. God loves those who work in groups. And, you know, it's interesting, the studies that Dr. Bob John at Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab and others have done with random number generators in studying consciousness and its non-local effect, even on mechanical and electromagnetic systems, is that if there's one person, say, putting their intent on a random number generator to affect it, it will have a certain effect, because consciousness is omnipresent and thought is moving within that field of omnipresent consciousness. So intent and thought will have that effect, which is the core of our contact protocols. Those of you who want to look into that, I'll give you some information in a moment. But if you have two people who love each other or united, the effect isn't twice as much, it's 10 times as much. So if you have a group, so there's this exponential growth in the power, and this is why I'm so excited about having all these hundreds of groups all over the world doing this, and what you guys are doing so beautifully is bringing people together to do this, because it has an effect in terms of transforming the energy of the planet and the trajectory of our future into peace and into enlightenment rather than warfare and collapse. And that this is what's needed, is for people to come together in that state of consciousness and then act from that state of consciousness, as opposed to just intellectualism or reactivity. And so this is really what's so powerful, and the science behind this is actually quite excellent, some of which we're going to present in this movie series that we hope to have finished in the next couple of months. And I think it's really exciting when people come together and they begin to experience that, because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and then you realize that you become part of this whole, and then that whole of even the group is tied into the ET whole, and then that's all tied into this cosmic being that is actually kind of resonating and phasing through all of us.
Love it. Yes, well, it's so funny, because when we were in that deep meditation, everybody came out of it. We thought 20 minutes had passed, and actually 2 hours had passed. That
is perfect. That is classic, actually. We've had that happen so many times. Actually, we have some photographs where we've been doing, where actually the photography shows a distortion in time, that we'll be doing something, and yes, and we've analyzed these, where Emery will take a time lapse, and it'll be an X amount of time, but the sky will have moved as if it was several X, or what have you.
Oh, yes.
So strange things. So I tell people, when you're doing these sort of protocols and you're contacting ETs that can come into our space-time from other dimensions, all kinds of things like that happen, and time isn't what we think it is. In reality, it can be separated from space, and it is transcended by consciousness. And so when you're in this deep level of consciousness, time is a different metric. And when you're in these other dimensions, time is a different metric. It's flowing at a different rate, if you will. And so as you go more and more into the state of the changeless, the eternal, the unbounded, time begins to change to where it actually vanishes. And in the transcendent state, the samadhi state that we go into, and that I train people to meditate and go into, there is no time and there is no space, and yet you're omnipresent in space and time at the same time. So there's this paradox of being omnipresent and eternal, and at the same time you can specifically be at any point in space and time, but then your perception of time here on Earth really does change to where a 2-hour period can seem like 15 or 20 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been happening a lot. And it's wonderful. It's very freeing.
Yeah, and there's an explanation for it, which I very quickly went through. There is a physics behind it in reality. And the science of consciousness is really the big science of the next 1,000 years. We talk a lot about the new energy and anti-gravity technologies, but I remind people that free energy and zero-point energy and energy from the vacuum was being discovered in the late 1800s up through the mid-1900s. We had fully operational anti-gravity vehicles by the mid-20th century. And so the fact that it's been kept secret by a bunch of petro-Nazis and kleptocratic fascists who have robbed us of our destiny by keeping us addicted to this nasty carcinogenic linear fossil fuel system is not to say that it doesn't exist. And if people look at the research studies and evidence that's at disclosureproject.org and the Orion Project.org, they'll see that, in fact, these are technologies that have existed and what we really should have been able to move on to by now. And this is where I tell people we're about 50 to 75 years off of our evolutionary timeline, which is why there's so much stress with Gaia, with the Earth and humanity right now, is that it's a perversion of our normal evolution, because the aberration is in the suppression of these wondrous sciences and technologies that should have given us an abundant and peaceful planet in the last 100 years. And during that period, there would have been the advancement of the science of consciousness to where it would have been much more developed in terms of not only its scientific understanding, but in terms of its daily practice amongst the world's population. So there's this retardation of our civilization that we have got to correct and get back on our evolutionary path, because the real big picture is that a very large yuga or era has opened in the last 100 years. It's a 500,000-year cycle, and the hallmark of which is enlightenment and universal peace. And so we're struggling to leave that old Kali Yuga behind and emerge into this era of enlightenment and coherence. But in the meanwhile, there are these very powerful forces that are kicking in, they're just screaming, kicking, stopping, doing everything they can to allow us to go into that new level, because they would no longer become the power centers they are. I mean, the Vatican would not have the power it has. The central oligarchs of the financial world wouldn't. Certainly the fossil fuel system wouldn't, and what have you. And I want to point out to people, because we're doing this interview within days of this catastrophic Sandy megastorm that hit the New York, New Jersey, northeastern area. And as I was seeing this thing unfold, a number of things came to mind. Number one of the reasons that storm got slammed into the northeast instead of going out into the ocean, as they often and usually do, is that there was a big blocking high over Greenland, because there's no Greenland sea ice left. It's all melted. And so there's a high sitting there that normally would not have been, number one. Number two, the oceans really are rising and warming. Number three, we have a grid with electric utilities that look exactly like pictures, if you Google them, back of the late 1800s in New York, where you have power lines with electrical lines running along. So we have a 100-year-old grid system and fossil fuel generation system, when what we should have is, instead of a grid or even a smart grid that we're spending $100 billion of tax dollar money to support and develop, is no grid, where every single home and car would have one of these electromagnetic generators pulling energy out of the flux field of the quantum vacuum and zero-point energy field that's all around us, which is what had been discovered beginning with the late 1800s and the work of Maxwell and Faraday, and then Nikola Tesla and T. Townsend Brown and all the other people that you can read about at the OrionProject.org. The fact is, we don't need a central grid. But you look now, 8 million people at one point were without any electricity in this bitter cold and devastation, when in reality the amount of specific damage was really very coastal and limited, and there was some flooding. But it's the power outages in New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and all over, even Virginia and the D.C. area. And most of that was just because you have trees and things falling on power lines that are from a paradigm of electric energy generation and distribution from the late 1800s. And this is really a crime against humanity and a crime against the Earth and Gaia. And I tell people these are all wake-up calls that we understand that we need to move with some really fresh out-of-the-box thinking on the solutions. And the solutions are not going to be massive solar farms and wind farms that are then in a smart grid where you still have electric power lines that are going to be yanked.
Right.
The future is, and GE likes that because, remember, General Electric makes the wind turbines. They made $15 billion in profits last year, paid no taxes, and got $3 billion back from the U.S. government in tax credits. Go look it up. This is fact, not a conspiracy theory. So they love that stuff. But the fact is, for a fraction of the money we're dumping into this nonsense, and a smart grid and all this, we could have electromagnetic generators that would be like your heat pump that would run your house off the grid forever with no pollution and no energy bill and at very, very low cost. Why don't we have it? Because they've either confiscated or murdered everyone, including people I know personally, who have come up with this. This is one of the reasons why this film, Sirius, is so important. We're wanting to get this information out and try to raise the funds to develop our own non-governmental high physics, high energy research lab to bring these sciences out, because we have such a huge brain trust and information trust of data that I think that within 1 to 2 years we'd have a prototype. But you're going to have a facility and have it staffed with some really good physicists and engineers, and you're going to need to raise, something modest, $6 to $10 million, which I don't have, but is a really small amount of seed funding for something like this. It was interesting. Last week I was meeting with a man in Washington who's part of a contractor service group that's auditing the Department of Energy. He says his part of it is just to look at one part of what we, the taxpayers, through the Department of Energy, have put into this smart grid, quote unquote. And the part he was looking at was almost $4 billion U.S. tax dollars. Now, for some tiny fraction of that, you could develop and distribute these systems where you wouldn't need a grid at all. So all of our policy, none of our leaders are actually dealing with this because they do not want to take on big oil and the big petrodollar and Goldman Sachs and all the trading entities. People forget that there's $600 trillion in oil, gas, coal, utilities, stocks, commodities, derivatives that are traded, and our entire financial macroeconomic system is based on people being dependent on that. But imagine if everyone was independent, and every village in India and every town in New York State where you are was independent for both agriculture, energy, water, and the abundance, the sort of tide that would lift all ships would be fantastic. However, the 200 or 300 individuals and corporations that now have over half of the net worth of the world would begin to become irrelevant, and that's what the struggle is about. People need to understand that. Not that I'm not trying to tell people a political thing here. I'm just telling people this is the reality, and until we fix this and come together as a people and say, okay, we are going to support the brilliant people who understand the physics and science of these energy systems, we're going to have one Superstorm Sandy after another and one disaster after another where there are going to be millions of people with no power freezing in their homes because we are sitting here using a 100-year-old energy grid and paradigm that needs to be retired, and we need to bring forward these new sciences and technologies which are not theoretical. They are in existence, and they need to be brought out of the shadows and out to benefit the human race and to benefit our beautiful Gaia, our Mother Earth that's groaning under the weight of 7 billion people living the way we are. And so this is an act of compassion, really, and love to do this, even though it is a high-tech science program, that ultimately it's an act of love and compassion and awareness to make it happen. And that's why we're really emphasizing that has to happen along with the development of consciousness and contact, because all of these issues have to be dealt with together. It can't be dealt with sequentially because, frankly, we're running out of time. We're not going to have another 50 or 100 years to waste.
Well, and it's interesting, Stephen, because when people are just surviving because their electricity is down and they don't have food and they're just surviving, it's if you look at neuroscience and what we're finding out about how the brain works, the part of the brain that gets stimulated in survival and trauma is the old brain.
Yes.
And the part when we're able to thrive and be in a compassionate state, the part of the brain that begins to evolve is the new brain. And that's where the stuff is we need as human beings to develop and manifest for this earth to become a harmonious place. But it's interesting that when we're in the traumas, that's not what we tend to, nor that's what our brain tends to.
Right, you go to survival, fight or flight mode, and
exactly.
that's the antique midbrain. And
exactly.
Yes, I know, and the higher consciousness centers almost shut down at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's understandable because you're just trying to survive.
Of course.
And this is where, if you look at the whole of humanity, there's 7 billion people. 48% of that 7 billion people do not even have a pot to pee in. They don't have toilets. They don't have running water. 48%. That's a true statistic. Go to the World Health Organization and look it up. And I think what people have to understand is that it's an act of compassion to say, look, we're going to stand up to these dysfunctional institutions and macroeconomic oligarchs and say it's time to do it. But people should understand the President of the United States isn't going to do this. I don't care if it's Obama or Romney. The UN will not do this. No large corporation will touch this because they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. It's going to have to be a group of concerned citizens who do it for the right conscious reasons, and that's what we're trying to put together. And I think that we have to say, look, we have to empower ourselves to do this.
Well, that's the movie, Serious. I mean, that's what it's all about. It's getting that movie out and having a grassroots approach to disclosure.
Exactly. And by the way, those of you who want to find out more about what we're doing with the film, it's at serious.neverendinglight.com. And if you can't make it to one of our expeditions, our next one is going to be in a couple weeks, but it's a long waiting list. We've closed it in California, but we're going to be on Marco Island in the Gulf of Mexico, February 3rd to the 9th. So you can go to CSETI.org, and there's a link there to where you can find out if you want to come to that and spend a week with me out on the Gulf of Mexico. It's a beautiful place to go. And then also, you know, if you can't come to one of these week-long expeditions and training programs, you can get the training program on an iPhone app or now an Android app. So there are links to that from CSETI.org also, so that you can actually have it on your smartphone. And if you don't have a smartphone, we have a training kit you can order from disclosureproject.org. So there are all these opportunities for people.
Well, and I want to say also, Stephen, that there are
about these things.
There are groups all over the United States that, you know, do these local CSETI nights, and people even have come to our group, and then they go back to their localities and they form new groups. So
that's right.
There's all kinds of ways to do this work.
Yes, and there's the Global CE-5 initiative where Acosta, coordinates people doing things periodically on the same night, so the whole global community making what we call close encounters of the fifth kind contact, making peaceful contact with these civilizations is done. So all that information is on those websites, and I encourage people to join up with that. And the more people who do this, I mean, we're getting reports from people I've never met, and I haven't trained them, but they've gotten the meditation CD, they've learned the mantra meditation, the remote viewing technique, the contact protocols, and literally these apps turn your phone into a magnetic field meter. There's the whole meditation on them. So they're very expensive apps, and now that we have it in Android as well as the iPhone app, you can, if you have a smartphone at all, you can get this. And I encourage people to do that if they can't attend one of these week-long expeditions, because I know not everyone can do that. But I think people will find that if they do that and just begin to do it with 2 or 3 like-minded people, and start building a nucleus, you'll be amazed at the kind of experiences you'll have.
Yeah, well, even in our group, a lot of people have not been able to go to your expeditions, but they've taken it so seriously, they've gotten this information, they've studied it, and they're committed, and that's just absolutely inspiring.
It is,
Steve,
and I really appreciate it.
Well, we started our group with 3 of us that went to the Outer Banks 3.5 years ago, and we came back, and there were 3 of us, and we went out in the field every month, and it just leaped in the last year and a half, I would say. People's consciousness just seem to be turning on, and we're getting calls from all over now for people wanting to come and interested and serious and dedicated, and that's the changing world. Wow. And that's how we become, more evolved humans that can actually transcend this planet, and in that way, perhaps at some point we can be members of this wonderful intergalactic community.
Well, actually, we're members now. It's just a matter of us accepting the invitation. The invitation has gone out. That's why they're here. They're waiting for us to answer a call. I said when I formed CSETI 22 years ago, there's a cosmic call going out, but no one's listening. But if
well, there you go.
All right, so if you listen, you'll hear it, and if you answer it, they will accept you. If you do it with the right ethics, with an open mind, without fear and prejudice, and grounded in this state of consciousness that's cosmic, because ultimately, since these are non-human intelligent life forms, it goes even beyond quote-unquote humanity. It goes into the core of our conscious, sentient capability as awake beings. And once you're in touch with that, then you can be an ambassador to the universe. You can be someone who can make contact with any species from any planet, because you've transcended even the broadness of the sense of humanity. You're now in this state of universality of consciousness, which is really our ultimate home and goal anyway. And see, once you're in that state, then the universe flings its doors open to you. And that's what I found, is that if people make a little bit of effort in that direction, they'll be astounded at how many ways that the ETs will then begin to enter their lives, their electronics, their homes, over their house, what have you, in all kinds of mysterious ways that are mind-blowing, because they're actually eagerly looking for people who are waking up and are willing to join in this interstellar family of intelligent life. And that's the time we're in. It's a very exciting time.
It is exciting. And thank you, Stephen, for the incredible work you have done and laid a path for the rest of us and continue to lay that path. And I just admire your moral courage, and I say this every time I'm on the radio with you, but your moral courage is astounding and inspiring, and inspires us to do this work here, and inspires my own moral courage and my own consciousness expansion. And so I want to thank you.
Well, thank you, and I really admire what you guys are doing, and doing a great job of training and bringing other people together to learn all this. And if more people did what you were doing, the world would be changed very quickly. So I think you guys are a great role model for others wanting to do this in their local communities. And thank you for doing it.
We're grateful for the opportunity. Thanks to you.
All right. Well, I think we're up and out of time. I'd like to thank Marilyn and Diane. They're in New York, and I'm glad you survived the hurricane and are doing well and have power. And to everyone at the World Pujan Network, I'd like to thank you all for hosting us. And those of you who are wanting to come to one of our expeditions, go to cseti.org and send us a note, and we'll try to link you up. And look for the Sirius.neverendinglight.com site if you want to find out about this exciting documentary movie that we're working on, and all the information about that is on that site. So until next time, keep looking up and be awake, and God bless.